Welcome to Nachtmeier Witness. Some nights feel wrong before anything happens. The air feels heavy, the room feels colder, and somewhere in the dark, you get the strange feeling that you are being watched. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who became witnesses to things they never expected to see. Some saw someone standing in the shadows. Some heard voices with no one nearby. Others found themselves in places that did not feel real at all. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a slow, dark atmosphere, subscribe to Nachtmeier Witness. Get comfortable. The night has already begun. The Norfolk 4 case is one of those stories that makes you lose faith in the idea that the justice system always wants the truth. It is not just a murder case. It is not just a case about a terrible crime. It is a story about police pressure, false confessions, tunnel vision, ignored evidence, and the way government officials can keep defending a broken story even after the truth is sitting right in front of them. It is the kind of case that makes you realize how terrifying it would be to be innocent and still get pulled into something so serious that your whole life becomes a fight against people who have already decided you are guilty. The crime happened in 1997 in Norfolk, Virginia, near one of the Navy bases in the area. The victim was the wife of a Navy man, and she was attacked and murdered in an apartment complex. It was the kind of crime that shakes a community because it happened close to where people lived, slept, parked their cars, carried groceries, and passed their neighbors in the hallway. An apartment complex is supposed to feel ordinary, even boring. People come home from work, lock their doors, hear footsteps upstairs, and trust that the person across the hall is just another neighbor. But after a violent crime happens there, every normal detail changes. A hallway stops being just a hallway. A door becomes part of a crime scene. The distance between apartments suddenly feels too small. The police needed answers. And in a case like that, pressure builds quickly. A woman had been murdered. People were scared. The community wanted someone arrested. Investigators wanted a theory that made sense. And from what happened afterward, it seems they latched onto a suspect almost immediately. Based on hearsay from the victim's friend, police arrested the neighbor who lived across the hall. That detail is chilling because it shows how quickly an ordinary person can become the center of a nightmare. One day he was just a neighbor in the same apartment complex. Then, because of a statement and a theory, he became the person police were looking at for one of the worst crimes imaginable. Once police decide on a theory, it can become dangerous if they stop letting the evidence lead them. That is what seems to have happened in this case. Instead of stepping back when parts of the story did not fit, the theory expanded. At first, the neighbor was arrested. Then, investigators eventually arrested more men. In total, 8 guys were pulled into the case. 4 were cleared, but the other 4 became known as the Norfolk 4. They included the original neighbor, and they were coerced into confessions because the police theory had grown into the idea that multiple people must have committed the crime together. False confessions are one of the scariest parts of the justice system because most people think they would never confess to something they did not do. It is easy to say that from a safe place. It is easy to believe you would stay strong, ask for a lawyer, keep saying the truth, and never let anyone pressure you into taking blame for a crime as serious as rape and murder. But interrogation rooms are not normal places. They are designed to break people down. Hours of questioning, threats, lies, exhaustion, fear, and promises can distort reality. When police tell someone again and again that the evidence proves guilt, when they say cooperation is the only way to avoid something worse, when they act like denial is useless, an innocent person can begin to feel trapped. They may confess not because they did it, but because they think confessing is the only way to survive the moment. That is what makes coerced confessions so terrifying. They do not always sound like obvious nonsense in court. Once they are written down, recorded, repeated, and presented by authorities, they can look powerful. Jurors hear a confession and think, why would anyone say they did it if they did not? But the Norfolk 4 case shows exactly why that question is dangerous. People can be pressured into saying things that are not true. They can be fed details. They can be made to believe resistance is hopeless. And once they confess, the system often treats the confession as stronger than anything else, even when the physical evidence does not match. The police theory became that multiple people had committed the crime together. That allowed them to explain away problems instead of facing them. If one confession did not fit perfectly, maybe another person was involved. If the evidence did not match one man, maybe it matched someone else in the group. The theory became flexible in the worst possible way. Instead of the evidence narrowing the suspect pool grew to protect the theory. That is one of the most frightening things about wrongful conviction cases. When investigators become committed to a story, they can keep adjusting the story so they never have to admit they might be wrong. Then came the man who actually fit the crime. He was already in jail for assaulting 2 other women around the same time. He confessed and said he had acted alone. That should have changed everything. A man with a history of similar violence, already incarcerated for attacks on women, admitted that he was the only person responsible. And no evidence proved that his confession was true. That should have been the moment when the entire case turned around. That should have been the moment when officials admitted the Norfolk 4 had been wrongfully accused and convicted. But that is not what happened. Instead, the city and the state refused to admit they were wrong. That is the part of the story that makes me angriest. Mistakes happen in investigations, even terrible mistakes. But when proof appears that innocent people were convicted, the moral thing to do is correct the mistake as quickly as possible. In this case, the response was not simple accountability. The system dug in. Appeals were resisted. The official position remained defensive. It became less about finding the truth and more about protecting the conviction, protecting the investigation, protecting reputations, and avoiding the public admission that the wrong men had been punished. One man was granted a retrial, but he was convicted again because the confession from the lone perpetrator was not allowed in court. That detail feels almost absurd in the worst way. Imagine being accused of a crime, and there is another man who has confessed to doing it alone, with DNA evidence supporting him, and the jury is not allowed to properly hear that full truth. How can a trial be fair when the strongest evidence of innocence is kept out? How can anyone trust a system that can say, in effect, yes, there is another confession that explains the crime, but we are not going to let that change the outcome? That is the kind of legal technicality that might make sense to lawyers on paper, but feels monstrous when you think about the human life underneath it. The Innocence Project eventually got involved, and that is when the case began to move toward the kind of public recognition it should have had much earlier. The Innocence Project has worked on many cases where bad investigations, false confessions, unreliable evidence, and official resistance kept innocent people trapped. Their involvement in the Norfolk 4 case helped bring more attention and pressure. Eventually, all 4 received conditional pardons in 2009. But even that was not full justice. A conditional pardon is not the same as the state clearly saying, "We were wrong. You are innocent." It is a halfway measure. It gets people out of prison, or improves their situation, but it can still leave a stain and a sense that the truth has not been fully honored. Full pardons came in 2017 after additional evidence was uncovered. That was years after the original crime, years after the arrests, years after false confessions, years after lives had been broken by a case that should have collapsed once the DNA and the actual perpetrator's confession came to light. By the time full pardons came, the damage had already been done. You cannot give someone back the years spent in prison or under the weight of a murder conviction. You cannot give back a military career, family stability, mental health, reputation, or the ordinary future they would have had if they had never been dragged into the case. A pardon matters, but it does not rewind time. And of course, when lawsuits were filed, both the city and the state settled out of court. That part is familiar in stories like this. After years of refusing to admit the obvious, after years of defending convictions, after years of legal fighting, settlements happen quietly. Money changes hands. Statements are carefully written. No one wants to say more than they have to. But the fact remains, innocent men were caught in a system that chose its own story over the truth. The settlements may acknowledge damage in a legal sense, but they do not fully capture the horror of what it means to be falsely branded as a rapist and murderer. The emotional terror of this case is not only about the four men, it is also about the victim and her family. A woman was murdered. Her life was taken in a brutal way. Her family deserved the truth. They deserved a real investigation that followed evidence instead of forcing people into a bad theory. Wrongful convictions do not serve victims. They betray them. When the wrong people are punished, the actual offender is hidden longer, the truth is delayed, and the family's grief is attached to a lie. Justice is not justice if it is built around innocent men. That is one of the most important parts of cases like the Norfolk 4. People sometimes act as if questioning convictions means caring less about the victim, but the opposite is true. The victim deserves the real story. The public deserves the real story. The accused deserve not to have their lives destroyed by coercion and tunnel vision. Everyone loses when the system chooses certainty over truth. The only people protected are the officials who do not want to admit they got it wrong. The apartment complex itself has its own eerie connection to the story. After the crime happened, the complex changed its name because of the bad publicity. That detail says a lot about how places try to escape their histories. A name can become stained after something terrible happens. People hear it and think of the murder, the investigation, the police, the news, the fear, the rumors. So management changes the name and hopes the place can start over. On paper, it becomes a different complex. New signs go up, new tenants move in, life continues. But the walls are still the same. The hallways are still the same. The ground remembers even if the sign does not. That is what makes the personal twist so unsettling. That apartment complex, renamed after the crime, ended up being the place where my future wife and I got our first apartment. We did not know about the name change. We did not know the history tied to the place. We were just starting out, choosing a first apartment the way people do, looking at rent, location, layout, and whether the place seemed livable. We had no idea that the complex had once been connected to such a horrible crime and such a massive miscarriage of justice. There is something deeply strange about living in a place without knowing what happened there. You cook, sleep, argue, laugh, make plans, bring in furniture, and build the early routines of a shared life. All the while, the place has another story under it, one you do not know yet. A violent crime happened there. Innocent men were dragged into the case. The complex changed its name to get away from the attention. And years later, you move in with no idea that your first apartment together is sitting on top of that history. When you learn it afterward, the memory of the place changes. Rooms you thought of as ordinary begin to feel connected to something darker. That is the kind of detail that makes true crime feel uncomfortably close. It is easy to think of cases as things that happen somewhere else, in places you would never go, to people who have no connection to you. Then you find out you lived in the renamed complex where a major wrongful conviction case began. Suddenly, the story is not just a documentary, article, or legal file. It is tied to a place where you carried groceries, parked your car, came home at night, and maybe thought you were safe. The past was right there, hidden behind a new name. The name change itself feels almost symbolic of the whole case. The apartment complex changed its name to escape the publicity, and the justice system tried, in its own way, to rename the truth. It took a case that did not fit and called it solved. It took coerced confessions and called them proof. It took innocent men and called them guilty. It took a lone perpetrator's confession and DNA evidence and tried to push it aside. Just like a building can change its sign while keeping the same walls, the system tried to change the story while the facts remained underneath. What makes the Norfolk 4 case so scary is that it shows how powerless a person can be once the system decides on them. These were not powerful men with endless money and influence. They were ordinary people, including Navy men, caught in a case where the police theory demanded suspects. Once they were inside that machine, the truth was not enough by itself. Nah was not enough at first. Another man's confession was not enough at first. Appeals were not enough at first. It took years, outside advocacy, new evidence, and public pressure to reach a point where full pardons were granted. That should scare anyone, because most of us like to believe innocence protects us. We think if we did not do something, we will be okay. We think the truth will come out quickly. We think DNA evidence will fix things. We think a confession from the actual offender will make the system stop and correct itself. But cases like this show that innocence is not always enough. Evidence is not always enough. The truth may be obvious and still resisted if admitting it would embarrass the people in power. That is a horrifying thought. It means justice is not automatic. It has to be fought for, and sometimes the fight lasts decades. The men involved had their lives reshaped by something they did not do. Even after pardons, even after settlements, the experience would stay with them. You do not simply walk away from being coerced into confessing to murder. You do not simply move on after prison, public accusation, legal battles, and years of being treated like a monster. The mind does not forget that. Relationships do not automatically heal. Careers do not return untouched. The fear, anger, shame, and trauma do not vanish because a piece of paper later says you were pardoned. The system can take years from someone and then act like a legal correction is enough. It is not. The case is also a warning about interrogation tactics. When police are allowed to pressure people until they say what fits the theory, confessions become dangerous. A confession should be strong evidence only when it matches facts independently known and is given freely. But if details are suggested, if suspects are exhausted or threatened, if they are made to believe they have no way out, then the confession becomes a product of the interrogation itself. It reflects pressure more than truth. The Norfolk 4 case is one of those examples people should study when they ask how false confessions happen. They happen because people can be broken, and because authorities can be wrong. It also shows how group crime theories can expand beyond reason. If the evidence points to one person, but investigators want multiple people, they can begin fitting men into roles like pieces of a story. Every inconsistency becomes explained, by adding another person. Every problem becomes a reason to widen the net. That kind of thinking is dangerous because it protects the theory from being disproven. Instead of asking, does this evidence show these men did it? Investigators begin asking, how can we make these men fit into what we already believe? That is not justice. That is storytelling with handcuffs. And the fact that 4 other guys were cleared while 4 remained caught in the case makes the whole thing feel even more chaotic. 8 men arrested in connection with 1 crime, only for the final truth to be that 1 man was responsible. That alone should have forced a serious reckoning. How does an investigation get from 1 offender to 8 accused people? How many assumptions, pressures, and errors have to stack up before that happens? It is hard to look at that and not see a system trying to build a case instead of discover the truth. The personal part, the apartment complex, brings the whole story down from the legal world into everyday life. My future wife and I got our first apartment there without knowing what had happened. We did not know we were living in a place that had changed its name to escape the shadow of a crime. That is the kind of fact that makes you look back and feel uneasy. How many places have histories we do not know? How many buildings have been renamed, repainted, rented out, and made ordinary again after terrible things happened inside them? People move into places thinking they are starting fresh, while the past is still there under the carpet, behind the walls, in old newspaper archives, and in the memories of people who lived nearby long enough to know. The Norfolk 4 case is haunting because it contains more than one kind of horror. There is the horror of the original crime, a woman attacked and murdered in her own apartment complex. There is the horror of innocent men being coerced into confessing. There is the horror of DNA evidence and a true confession not immediately freeing them. There is the horror of officials refusing to admit they were wrong. There is the horror of appeals being denied, of a retrial where key truth was not allowed in, and of years passing before conditional and then full pardons arrived. And then there is the quieter horror of a place trying to hide its past with a new name, while people like us moved in without knowing what had happened there. It is the kind of case that should make people angry, but also afraid. Angry because lives were ruined and truth was resisted. Afraid because the system that did it is the same kind of system ordinary people depend on if something happens to them. We want to believe police will search for the right person, prosecutors will care about truth, courts will correct mistakes, and evidence will matter more than ego. The Norfolk 4 case shows what happens when those safeguards fail at the same time. It shows how a bad theory can become a conviction, how a false confession can become a prison sentence, and how an innocent person can be left fighting for years while officials protect their own version of events. That is why the case stays with me. Not only because it is a famous wrongful conviction case, but because it crossed into my own life in such an eerie way. The apartment complex where the crime happened changed its name after the bad publicity, and years later, without knowing that history, my future wife and I moved in as our first apartment together. We were beginning a life in a place that had once been the center of a nightmare for another family and for 4 innocent men. That realization makes the world feel strange. It reminds you that the past is often closer than you think, hidden behind new signs, fresh paint, and names chosen to make people forget. The Norfolk 4 should be remembered because it shows how much damage can be done when investigators decide too early, when confessions are forced, when DNA is ignored, and when institutions would rather defend themselves than admit the truth. A woman lost her life. Innocent men lost years of theirs. A community was given a false story. The real offender was not accepted as the sole perpetrator. when the evidence should have made it clear. And it took the work of outside advocates, more evidence, pardons, and lawsuits to get even a partial measure of justice. That is not a system working well. That is a system being dragged toward the truth long after it should have gone there on its own. Something very similar happened to me about 10 years ago, and even now I do not fully know how to explain it in a way that makes sense to someone who has never gone through it. I can describe the details, and I can tell myself the words people usually use for it now, like sleep paralysis, or maybe even astral projection. But those words still do not fully capture what it felt like when it was happening. At the time, it did not feel like a sleep problem. It did not feel like a dream. It felt like something was coming into the room every night, finding me at the exact moment when my body was weak and tired, and then slowly climbing over me while I was still awake enough to know it was there. It started during a period when I had to sleep on my back because I was wearing a back brace. That part matters because I have always felt like I might have been able to stop it more easily if I could have slept another way. Most people do not think much about the position they sleep in until they are forced into one position night after night. Sleeping on your back can already make you feel exposed. Your chest is open. Your face is pointed up toward the dark ceiling. You cannot curl in on yourself or turn away from the room. But with a back brace on, I felt even more trapped. I could not just roll over comfortably. I could not twist around whenever I wanted. My body felt locked into place before anything strange even began. The first few times it happened, I noticed it right as I was falling asleep. It always came during that strange in-between moment when you are not fully awake anymore, but you are not truly asleep either. Your thoughts start to drift, your body gets heavy, and the room around you begins to feel farther away. That is usually a peaceful feeling for people, the moment right before sleep takes over. But for me, that moment became something I dreaded. I would be lying there, tired and trying to rest, and then I would feel it begin at my feet. It felt like a heavy weight, not just a numbness or the normal heaviness of sleep, but something deliberate, something with direction. It would start low, around my feet, and then slowly climb upward. It was like pressure moving over my body, inch by inch, from my feet toward my legs, then my stomach, then my chest. I cannot explain why, but I always knew where it was. I could feel its progress. It was not pain exactly, but it was deeply uncomfortable, like something invisible was settling onto me and claiming more of me the higher it moved. It felt like my body was being covered from the bottom up. Every time it happened, I became scared before it reached my head. I did not know what would happen if it got that far, and I did not want to find out. Something in me knew that letting it reach the top of my head was a line I should not cross. So, I would force myself to move. I would turn, twitch, shift, or do anything I could to break the feeling before it completed whatever it was trying to do. Most of the time, that worked. The pressure would stop. My body would come back to me. The room would feel normal again, or at least normal enough that I could breathe and tell myself I had imagined it. But then, on another night, it would start again. The problem was that because of the back brace, turning was not easy. I had to sleep on my back, and that made the whole thing worse. It felt like I was being put into the exact position that made me vulnerable. I would lie there staring into the dark, already afraid that the feeling would return, and once it started, I had to fight harder than I should have, just to move. I began to hate the moment before sleep. I hated feeling my body relax because I knew relaxation might be the opening it needed. Sleep, which should have been rest, became something I had to guard myself against. For a while, I kept stopping it. Every time the weight climbed too high, I would turn or force some kind of movement. I never let it get to my head. I do not know how many nights it happened like that, but it happened enough that I started to recognize the pattern. The pressure would begin at my feet. It would rise. I would panic. I would move before it reached the top. Then it would end. It was like there was a door being pushed open, and every time I managed to slam it shut before whatever was on the other side could come through. But one night, I made a different choice. I do not know if I was tired of fighting it, curious, frustrated, or just worn down from being afraid of it so many times. Maybe part of me wanted proof that nothing would happen. Maybe I thought if I let it finish once, I would understand it and stop being scared. There is a strange kind of courage that comes from exhaustion. Sometimes you do not face something because you are brave. You face it because you are too tired to keep running from it. That night, when the pressure started at my feet again, I decided I was not going to turn away. I was not going to stop it. I was going to let it climb all the way to my head and see what happened. At first, it was the same as always. The heaviness started low and moved upward. It covered my feet, then my legs. I could feel it spreading over me, slow and certain. My body wanted to react the way it always did. I wanted to turn. I wanted to break free before it reached my chest. But I forced myself to stay still. I lay there in the dark, breathing as calmly as I could, even though fear was rising in me with the pressure. It moved higher. It reached my stomach, then my chest, then my neck. By that point, every instinct in me was screaming to stop it, but I did not. I let it keep going. When the pressure reached the top of my head, everything changed at once. It was not gradual anymore. It did not feel like falling asleep. It felt like I was pushed out of my body. That is the only way I can describe it. 1 second, I was lying in bed under that heavy pressure, and the next, I was no longer inside myself the way I had been before. I was above my bed, near the top of the ceiling, looking down. I could see myself sleeping below me. I could see my own body lying there in the bed with the brace, completely still. The room was not imagined in the loose, shifting way dreams usually are. It felt clear and immediate. I was above myself, watching myself, and I knew exactly what I was seeing. The fear that hit me then was different from the fear I had felt before. Before, I had been afraid of what might happen if the pressure reached my head. Now I knew something had happened, and I wanted it to stop immediately. There is nothing normal about seeing your own body from outside of it. People talk about out-of-body experiences like they are peaceful or spiritual, and maybe for some people they are. Mine was not peaceful. I felt exposed in a way I had never felt before. My body was below me, and I was separate from it. The thing I had lived inside my whole life was suddenly something I was looking at from above. That realization scared me so badly that all I wanted was to get back. I do not know how I re-entered my body. I only know that I panicked, and then suddenly I was back. It felt like being slammed into myself. I shot up out of bed with my arms flinging out to the sides, as if my body had been thrown awake. My heart was pounding. I was terrified. I was awake in the room again, fully inside myself, but I did not feel safe. The bed no longer felt safe. My own body no longer felt fully safe. I had seen it from above. I had watched myself lying there, and there was no way to explain that away easily in the moment. Afterward, I tried to make sense of it. Years later, I know enough to say it was probably sleep paralysis. I have had sleep paralysis a few times since then too, sometimes with the feeling of demons or dark figures connected to it. I know people can explain some of that through the mind waking before the body does, or through hallucinations during the boarder, between sleep and waking. I understand that there are scientific ways to talk about it, but understanding the name of something does not erase the terror of experiencing it. When you are the one trapped inside it, unable to move, feeling a presence, feeling pressure, seeing or sensing things that should not be there, it does not feel like a harmless brain glitch. It feels like an attack. And honestly, part of me still wonders if I astral projected that night. I do not say that as a claim I can prove. I only know what it felt like. It felt like I left my body. It felt like I was above the bed at the ceiling, looking down at myself. It felt too clear to dismiss as an ordinary dream. Maybe sleep paralysis opened the door to something that felt like astral projection. Maybe it was all my mind. Maybe it was something spiritual. I cannot say for sure, but I know it happened to me, and I know how real it felt. The experiences did not stop immediately after that night. For a while, I kept dealing with that kind of fear around sleep. Once you have something like that happen, bedtime becomes different. You do not just lie down and relax. You listen. You wait. You wonder whether the pressure will start again. You wonder whether you will be trapped in your own body. You wonder whether you will see something in the dark, or feel something standing near you, or sense that awful heaviness climbing from your feet toward your head again. Your room can look exactly the same, but it no longer feels like the same room. The night becomes something you have to survive. The later episodes felt even more clearly demonic to me. I know that word makes some people uncomfortable, and I know not everyone believes in that kind of thing, but that is what it felt like. It did not feel neutral. It did not feel like random images from a sleepy brain. It felt like something hostile was there with me during those moments when I could not move. That is what makes sleep paralysis so uniquely awful. Your body is frozen, but your fear is completely alive. You cannot run. You cannot fight. You cannot even always speak. You can only lie there and endure whatever your mind or something else is showing you. Then, a few weeks later, everything changed for me when I met Jesus. I do not mean that in a casual way. I mean that my faith became real to me during that period, and it gave me something I had not had before, a way to fight back. During those attacks, when I felt that demonic presence or that paralyzing fear, I began to say his name. Sometimes maybe I could not say it out loud at first, but I would say it in my mind, or force it out however I could. Jesus. Just his name. And when I did, the fear began to lose its grip. The attacks started to stop. The darkness did not feel as powerful. I finally felt like I was not alone in the room with whatever was happening. That was the turning point. Before that, I had been trying to fight with my own body. I had been trying to turn over, shake it off, or force myself awake. But when I started calling on Jesus during those moments, it felt like I had help outside of myself. It felt like the thing pressing down on me no longer had full control. Whether someone wants to explain that spiritually or psychologically is up to them. All I know is that for me, saying his name made a difference. The attacks lost their hold on me, and after a while, they stopped happening the same way. For the first time in weeks, I was able to sleep again. That may sound simple, but when sleep has become frightening, being able to rest feels like getting part of your life back. People who have never dreaded sleep may not understand how exhausting it is to be afraid of the one thing your body needs every night. You can be tired all day and still fear the bed when night comes. You can want rest and be afraid of the moment rest begins. When the attack stopped, the relief was enormous. I could lie down without waiting for the weight to start at my feet. I could close my eyes without wondering if I would be pushed out of my body again. I could sleep without feeling like something was waiting for me in the dark. Looking back, I still do not have one perfect explanation for what happened. Sleep paralysis explains some of it. The back brace and sleeping on my back probably made it more likely. The in-between state before sleep may have made my body and mind vulnerable to strange experiences. But none of that fully removes the feeling that something spiritual was happening too. The heaviness climbing over me felt intentional. The out-of-body moment felt real. The later attacks felt demonic. And the way things changed when I began calling on Jesus felt just as real as the fear had been. I think that is what makes experiences like this so hard to talk about. If you tell someone who believes only in medical explanations, they may reduce it to sleep paralysis and nothing more. If you tell someone who believes only in spiritual warfare, they may focus only on the demonic side. But for the person who lived it, it can feel like both at once. It can be the body doing something strange and the soul feeling attacked. It can be a sleep disorder and a spiritual battle. It can be explainable in one way and still terrifying in another. What I remember most is the feeling of the pressure reaching my head and that sudden separation from my body. I remember being at the ceiling. I remember looking down at myself. I remember the shock of seeing my own body lying there. I remember the panic of wanting to get back inside myself. I remember shooting upright, arms flying out, heart pounding, knowing that something had just happened that I could never fully forget. That moment burned itself into my memory because it crossed a line. Before that, I was afraid of what might happen. After that, I knew what it felt like when the line was crossed. 10 years later, I can talk about it more calmly, but I still do not think of it as just a weird sleep event. It changed the way I understood the night. It changed the way I thought about the body. It changed the way I thought about spiritual protection. And it made me understand why people throughout history have described sleep paralysis in terms of demons, spirits, or evil presences. When it happens, it feels ancient. It feels like the kind of fear human beings have always had in the dark, lying still, unable to move, sensing that something is near. For me, the story ended with relief. The pressure stopped coming the same way. The attacks faded. Saying the name of Jesus became my way out, my anchor, my defense when the fear returned. I finally got my sleep back. But I still remember what it was like before that, lying on my back in that brace, feeling the weight begin at my feet and slowly climb toward my head, knowing that if I let it reach the top, something would happen. And one night, when I finally gave in and let it happen, I found myself above my own bed, at the ceiling, staring down at my sleeping body, and realizing that whatever this was, dream or paralysis or something beyond both, it was more terrifying than I had ever imagined. This happened around midnight in 1976, out on the back roads of rural Missouri, in the kind of place where the dark feels bigger than the road itself. We were driving through an area that felt like it had been forgotten by the rest of the state, maybe 30 miles from the nearest real sign of humanity. No houses with porch lights, no gas stations, no little stores, no traffic passing every few minutes to remind you that other people existed. Just empty road, trees, fields, curves, hills, and that deep country darkness that makes your headlights feel like the only thing keeping the world in front of you from disappearing completely. There were 4 of us in the car that night, and that is the only reason I have never been able to convince myself it was some kind of hallucination. If I had been alone, I probably would have spent the rest of my life telling myself I was tired, or high, or seeing things, or that my mind had taken some shape in the dark and turned it into a person. But I was not alone. There were 4 of us, and all 4 of us saw the same things. We still talk about that night even now, because none of us has ever been able to explain it in a way that makes real sense. The strangest image of the whole night came later, but I will start with it because it still sits in my mind like a photograph. We were driving down this empty highway when our headlights caught a man sitting on a guardrail at the side of the road. He was not walking, hitchhiking, waving for help, or acting like someone stranded. He was just sitting there, perfectly posed, one leg crossed over the other, elbow resting on his knee, hand under his chin, almost exactly like that famous thinking man pose. He was staring straight across the road, completely blank, as if the car coming toward him did not exist at all. The way he was dressed made it even worse. He looked like he had stepped out of the 1930s. I mean, the full old gangster look. Pinstriped suit, hat with the brim turned down, spats on his shoes, the whole thing. Not a costume like something from a cheap party. Not some random guy wearing a hat and suit. He looked completely out of time, like a man from another decade had been placed on that guardrail in the middle of nowhere and told to sit still until somebody passed. He did not turn his head. He did not react to the headlights. He did not squint, flinch, wave, or show any sign that he knew a car full of people was coming down the road in the middle of the night. That alone would have been enough to make the night unforgettable. A man dressed like a 1930s gangster, sitting like a statue on a lonely guardrail in rural Missouri at midnight, miles from anything, not reacting to us at all. But that was not even the first strange thing we saw. That came about half an hour after the first incident, the one that had already put all of us on edge. Earlier that night, we had been driving through the same empty stretch of road when we came around a curve and saw a group of kids standing in the middle of the highway. There were maybe 8 of them, all high school age from what we could tell. They were wearing gym clothes, shorts and t-shirts, the kind of shirts schools used for teams, the ones you could turn inside out if you were on the opposing side. That detail stood out because it made them look like they had come straight from some school gym or practice, except there was no school anywhere near us. No field, no bus, no houses, nothing. They were in the road, right in the middle of a curve, where any car coming through too fast could have hit them before the driver even had time to understand what was happening. They were walking in our direction, but not normally. They were moving slowly, dull and steady like zombies. I do not mean they were groaning or acting theatrical. I mean there was no alertness in them, no concern, no sense that they understood they were standing in the middle of a highway at night with a car coming toward them. They did not scatter. They did not look surprised. They did not even seem to care. We had to stop the car to avoid hitting them. The headlights lit them up clearly, and they just kept coming toward us. That was the first moment when the whole thing shifted from weird to creepy. If they had laughed or run off, we would have assumed it was a prank. If they had shouted something, we would have assumed they were drunk. If they had looked scared, we might have thought they were lost. But they did none of that. They just kept walking in our direction with that same blank, slow movement, like they were following a path only they could see. We got out of the car and yelled at them. We were young and stupid ourselves, so we did not exactly handle it gently. We shouted obscenities and told them they were idiots for standing in the road. We told them they were going to cause an accident. We yelled that someone could come around that curve and kill them. We expected some kind of reaction. An argument, laughter, fear, embarrassment, anything. But they did not react. They just kept walking toward us in that dull zombie-like way. That was when the feeling in the air changed. It was not funny anymore. It was not just a group of dumb kids doing something dangerous. There was something wrong with them. Their silence was wrong. The way they moved was wrong. The way they ignored the car, the headlights, and our yelling was wrong. We were standing there in the road, angry and confused, and they were moving toward us like we were not really there. At some point, we got back in the car. We still thought they were probably playing some kind of game, maybe trying to scare drivers or prove how tough they were. So we did something stupid. We drove toward them, playing chicken, fully expecting them to scramble out of the way at the last second. Any normal person would have. Even the dumbest teenagers should have jumped when a car started moving toward them on a dark highway. But they did not. They just kept walking westward at the same pace, not flinching, not speeding up, not stepping away. We had to go around them on the shoulder to avoid hitting them. I remember looking out the back window as we passed, and all of us reacting at once, basically saying, "What the hell was that?" None of us could believe what had just happened. They had not reacted like people. They had not reacted like kids playing a prank. They had acted like the car was irrelevant, like nothing we did could matter to them. We were laughing a little because we were nervous, but underneath that was real confusion. Something about it felt deeply off. We drove to the bottom of the hill, then crossed the median and went back because we wanted to verify what we had just seen. That is how strange it was. We could not just keep driving. We had to turn around and look again, because our brains were already trying to reject the memory. We wanted to prove to ourselves they were just kids being stupid. We wanted to catch them laughing, or running away, or hiding in the grass. We wanted the situation to become normal. But when we came back, the group had crossed the median and was now walking in the eastbound lanes. That part bothered me too, because the median was full of knee-deep grass, the kind of grass you did not casually walk through at night unless you had a reason. In that area, it was full of chiggers and who knows what else. But they had crossed it anyway, and now they were on the other side of the highway, still moving with that same slow, empty determination. Again, we stopped the car. Again, we shouted at them. By then, we had decided they had to be drugged-out kids playing some kind of prank. That was the most reasonable explanation we could come up with. Maybe they were high on something. Maybe they were trying to scare people. Maybe they were from some nearby school event we did not know about. Though that made no sense because we were so far from everything. We yelled at them again, calling them idiots, telling them they were going to get killed, trying to get some reaction out of them. Nothing. They kept walking toward us like we were not worth noticing. They did not laugh. They did not talk. They did not break character, if it was character. They did not even seem annoyed. Their faces and movements stayed dull, steady, and wrong. So, once again we drove toward them, thinking surely they would move this time, and once again they did not flinch. We had to go around them on the shoulder. At that point, the joke was gone. Whatever they were doing, it was not normal. It was not even normal stupidity. It felt like we were dealing with people who were either completely out of their minds or not fully present in the same reality we were in. We decided to call the police. Part of it was concern, sure, because if they stayed in the road, someone really might hit them. But if I am honest, part of it was also that we were young and thought it might be entertaining to watch them get arrested. We figured the police would roll up, catch these kids acting like idiots in the highway, and that would be the end of it. We drove to the nearest payphone, called it in, and then headed back toward the spot where we had seen them. When we got back, they were gone, not hiding nearby, not walking farther down the road, not standing in the grass, not visible in the trees. Gone. That made no sense. There had been 8 of them. They had been moving slowly. We had only been gone long enough to reach a payphone, make the call, and return. They could not have gotten far, not at the pace they had been walking. There was nowhere obvious for them to go. No car waiting with lights on, no house close by, no side road that made sense, no school, no gym, no crowd, no explanation. The road was empty again, as if they had never been there at all. That was when the whole thing really started to feel impossible. If they had been pranksters, where did they go? If they were high or drunk, how did 8 of them vanish so quickly in the middle of nowhere? If they had run into the woods, why had we not seen them? Why would they do that? Why had they been walking in the road like that in the first place? And why had they not reacted to a car driving straight at them? We were still trying to make sense of that when, about half an hour later, we saw the man on the guardrail. That is why the gangster-looking man felt even more unreal than he might have otherwise. If he had been the only strange thing that night, maybe we could have convinced ourselves he was some eccentric local, or someone in costume, or a drunk guy waiting for a ride. But after the group of kids in the road, seeing him felt like a second piece of something larger and stranger. It made the whole night feel like we had driven into a pocket of the world where time, people, and logic did not line up right. He sat there in that old-fashioned outfit, perfectly still, staring across the highway like he was looking at something none of us could see. He did not acknowledge us any more than the kids had. That was the connection between the two encounters. The kids had ignored traffic like the cars did not matter. The man ignored us like we were ghosts passing through his space instead of the other way around. There was no surprise in him, no curiosity, no fear, no human reaction at all. I can still picture him. The hat, the suit, the posture, the way the headlights must have hit him. A man dressed from another era, sitting alone at midnight in the middle of nowhere, 30 miles from the nearest source of humanity, acting as if our car was not even there. It was so strange that it almost felt staged. But staged by who? For what? Who would go that far out into rural Missouri, dress like a 1930s gangster, sit on a guardrail in the dark, and refuse to react when a car passed? And how would that connect to 8 silent teenagers walking through traffic like sleepwalkers? None of it fit. That is what still bothers me about the night. Strange things happen. People do weird things. Teenagers play dangerous pranks. Drunk people wander roads. Eccentric people dress oddly. Military aircraft fly low. Rural areas have their own odd characters and stories. Any one piece might be explainable by itself, but that night had too many pieces, and they came too close together. A group of blank high school-aged kids in gym clothes walking down the middle of the highway in the dark. A second pass proving they had crossed the median and were still doing it. Their complete lack of reaction when we yelled and drove toward them. Their sudden disappearance after we called police. Then the man dressed like he had stepped out of the 1930s, sitting alone on a guardrail like a statue. It was one of those nights where everyone in the car kept talking at once, because silence would have made it worse. We were trying to explain it, joking because we were nervous, arguing over what we had seen, repeating details back to each other. They didn't move. They didn't even look scared. Where did they go? Did you see that guy's clothes? What the hell was he doing out there? 4 people, all trying to make the same impossible memory fit into something ordinary. And like I said, if I had been alone, I might have eventually blamed myself. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the headlights distorted things. Maybe the road and darkness played tricks on my eyes. But there were 4 of us. 4 witnesses. 4 people who saw the kids. 4 people who saw the man. 4 people who still remember it decades later. That matters. Shared weirdness is harder to dismiss. You can doubt your own senses, but when everyone else in the car is saying the same thing, the event becomes harder to bury. The night ended in a completely different kind of trouble, which almost makes the whole story sound ridiculous. But it is true. After all of that, after the zombie-like kids and the gangster on the guardrail and calling the police from a payphone, I dropped off my friends and started heading home. I stopped at the local car wash, where we kids always loitered. It was one of those places teenagers hung around, because there was not much else to do. A cop pulled up, probably to run us off like they always did. Except that night, they did not just run us off. They decided to search my car. They found some weed, and they proudly hauled my scrawny ass off to jail for the night. So after one of the weirdest, most unexplainable experiences of my life, the night ended with me sitting in jail over weed. There is something almost funny about that now, in a dark way. We had seen things on a back road that none of us could explain. Called the police because a group of kids seemed like they were going to get themselves killed, and then I was the one who ended up arrested before the night was over. That is why the whole night feels sealed in my memory. It had everything: empty rural roads, a group of teenagers moving like they were in a trance, a man dressed from another time sitting on a guardrail in the middle of nowhere, a payphone call to the police, the sudden disappearance of the kids, and then, to top it off, my own arrest at the local car wash. It sounds like a story someone would make up after too many beers, but it happened. No exaggeration, no joke. 4 of us witnessed it, and we have talked about it ever since. I do not know what those kids were. Maybe they were high. Maybe they were sleepwalking, though 8 people sleepwalking together down a highway makes no sense. Maybe they were part of some prank we never understood. Maybe they ran into the woods faster than we thought, and somehow vanished without a trace. Maybe the man on the guardrail was a real person in costume for reasons only he knew. Maybe he had nothing to do with the kids. Maybe the whole night was just a string of human weirdness lining up in a way that made it feel supernatural. But deep down, I have never been satisfied with any of those explanations. They feel too small for what we saw. The way the kids moved, the way they ignored danger, the way they disappeared, the way that man sat there in old gangster clothes staring across the road like he was watching another world. It all felt wrong in the same way. Not movie wrong, not jump scare wrong, just quietly, deeply wrong. The road was too empty for that many people to be there. The kids were too calm for the danger they were in. The man was too still for someone sitting alone at midnight in the middle of nowhere. And all of them, in their own way, acted like we were the strange ones passing through their night instead of them intruding into ours. That is the part I remember most. Not fear exactly, at least not the kind where you scream and panic. It was more like the world had slipped sideways for a couple of hours, and we had driven through a place where the rules were different. People did not react to cars. Kids vanished from empty roads. Men from another era sat on guardrails under the dark Missouri sky. And then, just as suddenly, the world snapped back into its normal shape, complete with a local cop, a car search, a little bag of weed, and a night in jail. I still do not know what to call it. Weird, unexplainable stuff is probably the best I can do, but I know it happened. I know there were 4 of us in that car. I know we saw those kids walking like zombies in the highway. And I know they disappeared after we called the police. I know we saw that man in the pinstriped suit, hat pulled low, spats on his shoes, sitting on the guardrail like he had been waiting there for decades. And I know that no ordinary explanation has ever felt good enough. It was a memorable night, for sure. The kind of night that starts as a drive through empty back roads and ends with a story you carry for the rest of your life. The kind of night that makes you think twice when you are alone on a dark highway and your headlights catch something ahead that should not be there. The kind of night that reminds you the world still has strange corners, and sometimes, if you are unlucky or lucky enough, you drive straight through one. Before the next witness tells their story, take a moment to subscribe to Nachtmeyer Witness. This channel is for the late hours, when sleep is close but the mind is still awake enough to notice every sound in the room. New true stories arrive here for anyone drawn to strange encounters, uneasy memories, and nights that never felt normal again. Leave a like if the stories have pulled you in so far. Now, let's return to the darkness. This happened in the summer of 1977, on a Wednesday night, back when we were young and had the kind of restless energy that makes small-town kids drive around for hours with no real plan. We lived in Branson, Missouri, and on Wednesday nights we would go up to Springfield and cruise Kearny Street. That was just what you did. There was not much deeper meaning to it. You got in the car, met up with friends, drove around, looked for other kids, maybe showed off a little, maybe got into harmless trouble, and stretched the night as long as you could before heading home. It was the kind of thing that felt completely normal at the time, even though now, looking back, I realize how many strange memories came from nights like that. The first strange part happened in Springfield, near the intersection of 60 and 65, not far from Greenlawn Cemetery. That detail matters because, in our youthful minds, we later connected it to what happened afterward. Maybe we were just trying to make sense of things. Maybe once you see two weird things in one night, your brain naturally wants to tie them together. But at the time, we were not thinking about ghosts, cemeteries, or anything supernatural. We were just driving around like we always did. There were 4 of us in the car. That is one of the reasons this story has stayed with me for 50 years. If I had been alone, I might have spent the rest of my life telling myself I imagined it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my eyes played tricks on me. Maybe the headlights and road made ordinary people look strange. But there were 4 of us, and all 4 of us saw it. We still talked about that night for years afterward, because none of us ever came up with an explanation that felt right. Near that intersection, close to Greenlawn Cemetery, we saw a group of kids in the road. There were maybe 8 of them, and they looked high school age. They were wearing gym clothes, shorts and t-shirts, the kind of shirts schools used for teams, the kind you could turn inside out if you were on the opposing side. That was the first detail that made them seem like normal kids at first. They did not look like drifters or adults or anything out of place in that way. They looked like they could have just come from a school gym or a practice, except the way they were acting was not normal at all. They were in the middle of the highway, walking in our direction like they had no concern for traffic. It was dark, and they were in a dangerous spot. If a car had come around that curve too fast, it could have hit them before the driver had any real chance to stop. We had to stop the car so we would not run into them. Our headlights were right on them, and they just kept walking toward us. The way they moved is what made it creepy. They were not laughing. They were not waving. They were not acting like kids pulling a prank. They were dull and steady, almost zombie-like. I do not mean they were doing some dramatic horror movie walk. It was worse than that because it felt empty. They were walking as if the car, the headlights, and the danger did not matter. They did not seem scared. They did not seem amused. They did not seem aware in the normal way. We got out and yelled at them. We were young, so we were not exactly polite about it. We shouted at them and told them they were idiots for walking in the road. We told them they were going to get themselves killed. We told them they could cause an accident. We expected them to react, because any normal group of teenagers would have reacted. They might have cursed back at us, laughed, run off, acted tough, or at least looked annoyed. But these kids did nothing. They just kept coming in that same slow, dull way. That was when the situation stopped feeling like simple stupidity. Something about their silence and their lack of reaction felt wrong. If they had been drunk or high, maybe they would have been louder, messier, or at least unpredictable. If it was a prank, they would have eventually broken character. But they did not. They just kept walking toward the car like they were following some path only they could see. We got back in the car and did another stupid teenage thing. We drove toward them, basically playing chicken, expecting them to scatter. We did not want to hurt anyone. We were just sure they would move once the car came at them. But they did not flinch. Not one of them. They kept walking westward, slow and blank, and we had to go around them on the shoulder to avoid hitting them. I remember all of us looking back through the rear window as we passed them, saying some version of, "What the hell was that?" We could hardly believe what we had just seen. It was not just that they were in the road. It was that they did not care. It was that a whole car full of shouting teenagers and headlights and a moving vehicle had not gotten any reaction out of them. We drove down to the bottom of the hill, crossed the median, and went back to verify it. We had to. The whole thing felt too strange to just leave alone. We wanted to prove to ourselves that they were only kids being stupid. Maybe they were laughing by then. Maybe they had run off. Maybe we had overreacted. But when we came back, they had crossed the grassy median and were now in the eastbound lanes. That median was not something you would normally cross for fun. It was knee-deep grass, full of chiggers and whatever else was out there. But somehow, they had crossed it, and there they were, still walking like they had been before. Again, we stopped. Again, we yelled at them. We called them idiots, told them they were going to get killed, told them to get out of the road. We had decided by then they must have been drugged out or playing some kind of strange prank. Still, they gave us nothing. They did not talk. They did not laugh. They did not break. They just kept moving toward us. Again, we drove at them, and again they did not flinch. We had to steer around them on the shoulder a second time. By then, the whole thing had a heavy feeling to it. The kind of feeling you get when your brain is trying to force something into an ordinary explanation, but every detail refuses to fit. We finally drove to the nearest payphone and called the police. Part of us was genuinely worried someone was going to hit them. Another part of us, being young and dumb, thought it would be entertaining to watch the police show up and haul these kids off for acting like fools in the highway. We thought we had found the evening's entertainment. We made the call and drove back to where we had seen them. They were gone. Not farther down the road, not in the grass, not hiding nearby, not visible anywhere. Just gone. There had been 8 of them. They had been moving slowly. We had not been gone long enough for them to vanish that completely. There was nowhere obvious for them to go, and nothing about their behavior suggested they suddenly decided to run. Yet when we returned, the road was empty, like none of it had happened. That alone would have made the night weird enough. But the second incident happened later, on 65 South, as we were heading back toward Branson. It was in the area where Saddlebrook is now. These days, people may not understand what that stretch was like back then. In those days, there was nothing between Ozark and Branson. Nothing. It was remote in a way that is hard to picture now if you only know the developed version of that area. It was not a place where you wanted to break down. At night, it felt like the road just cut through darkness and empty land, with no help close by and no reason for anyone to be standing around. That is where we saw him. Sitting on a guardrail beside 65 South was a man dressed like he had stepped out of the 1930s. He had one leg crossed over the other, his elbow resting on his knee, and his hand under his chin like the thinking man pose. He was staring straight across the road, not looking down the highway, not watching for cars, not acting like a person waiting for a ride or dealing with car trouble. He was just sitting there, still and blank, like he had been placed there. His clothes are what burned into my memory. He looked like an old gangster, pinstripe suit, hat with the brim turned down, spats on his shoes, the whole thing. Not like a modern person wearing a silly costume. Not like someone on the way home from a party. This was the middle of the night on an empty stretch of Missouri highway, miles from anywhere, in 1977. There was no reason for a man dressed like Al Capone or someone from the Bonnie and Clyde era to be sitting alone on a guardrail out there. He did not react to us at all. That was the detail that connected him, in my mind, to the kids we had seen earlier. The kids did not react to traffic. The gangster did not react to us. He did not turn his head when our headlights hit him. He did not acknowledge the car. He did not wave, flinch, stand, or even seem curious. He stared straight across the road like we were not there. We were all stunned. Again, there were 4 of us. 4 witnesses. 4 people seeing the same impossible-looking thing. If the group of kids had put us on edge, this man took the night into a different category. Because what were the chances of seeing those zombie-like kids near Greenlawn Cemetery in Springfield, then later, on the remote road back to Branson, seeing a man dressed like a 1930s gangster sitting alone on a guardrail like some kind of ghost from another time? In our young minds, we connected the 2 things. We could not help it. The first incident happened near Greenlawn Cemetery. The second happened on a lonely stretch of 65 South, where there was nothing around. Maybe we were already spooked. Maybe the cemetery detail made the whole thing feel haunted. And the man's clothing made us think of old crime stories. Al Capone, Bonnie and Clyde, that whole era of gangsters and outlaws. I do not know what he was. I do not know if he was a ghost, a living person, a prankster, a hallucination shared by 4 people, or something else entirely. I just know what we saw. The strangest thing about him was how perfectly out of place he was. A person broken down on the highway usually has a car nearby, or they are walking, or they are trying to get help. A drunk person acts drunk. A prankster looks for a reaction. A stranded person reacts to headlights. This man did none of that. He sat in that perfect pose in that old-fashioned outfit, staring blankly across the road as if he belonged to a different time and had no interest in ours. It has been about 50 years, and I still wish I could remember the exact date. I know it was summer of 1977, and I know it was a Wednesday night because Wednesday was the night we went to Springfield to cruise Kearny Street. But the exact date is gone. Time does that. It takes the numbers and leaves the images. I cannot tell you the day on the calendar, but I can still see those kids in the headlights. I can still see them walking like nothing could touch them. I can still see that man on the guardrail in his pinstriped suit, hat brim turned down, sitting there in the middle of nowhere like a scene from another decade. The night ended in a completely different kind of trouble. After all of that, after dropping off my friends, I stopped at the local car wash where we kids always loitered. A cop pulled up, like they often did, usually just to run us off. But that night, instead of only telling us to leave, they searched my car and found some weed. They proudly took my scrawny ass to jail for the night. Since I was a juvenile, that record no longer exists. So there is no easy official paper trail I can point to and say, here, this proves the date. I wish there was. Not because the arrest is something to brag about, but because it would help pin the night down in time. Instead, all I have is the memory, the fact that it was summer 1977, a Wednesday night, and the knowledge that 3 other people saw the same things I did. That is what keeps it from fading into just another old story. Memories can change over 50 years. People can add details without meaning to. But the core of that night never changed for any of us. We went from Branson to Springfield to cruise Kearny Street. We saw those kids near 60 and 65, close to Greenlawn Cemetery, walking in the road like they were in a trance. We yelled at them. We drove around them. We turned back and saw them again. We called the police. They vanished. Later, on 65 South heading back toward Branson, in a place that was empty and remote back then, we saw the gangster-looking man sitting on the guardrail, staring across the road like we did not exist. Then I ended the night in the pokey over weed. It sounds ridiculous when I put it all together, but it happened. It was one of those nights where the world felt slightly wrong, like we had driven through a pocket of something that did not belong to ordinary life. The kids did not behave like normal kids. The man did not look like he belonged in 1977. The locations made it feel even stranger, especially with the first incident being near the cemetery and the second happening on that lonely stretch toward Branson. In our minds, we tied them together because how could we not? Two impossible feeling encounters in one night, both with people who seemed not to recognize us or the danger around them. Maybe those kids were drugged. Maybe they were sleepwalking, although 8 high school-aged kids sleepwalking together across a highway makes no sense. Maybe they were playing some kind of strange prank and somehow disappeared before we returned. Maybe the man in the gangster outfit was a real person with some reason to be out there that we never understood. Maybe he was dressed for an event, or maybe someone dropped him off, or maybe there was a car hidden somewhere nearby. I have tried to give it ordinary explanations over the years, but none of them fully work. The place where the gangster sat was too remote. Back then, there was nothing between Ozark and Branson, and certainly nothing that made sense for a man dressed like a 1930s gangster to be waiting on a guardrail at midnight. The kids were too unresponsive, too calm in the face of danger, and then too suddenly gone. The two incidents were too close together in time, and the way both sets of people ignored us has always bothered me. They did not look scared, surprised, angry, or amused. They acted like we were not part of their world. That is the part I can never shake. It was not just what we saw. It was how they behaved. The kids walking straight into danger without caring. The man sitting on the guardrail without acknowledging a car full of teenagers passing him in the dark. Both encounters had that same blankness. That same feeling of people who were visible but somehow not fully present. I do not know what was out there that night. I do not know if it had anything to do with Greenlawn Cemetery, old ghosts, gangsters, the Bonnie and Clyde era, or anything supernatural at all. Maybe our young minds connected things that were not connected. Maybe the truth is strange, but ordinary. But after 50 years, I still do not have an explanation that makes the memory settle. What I do know is that it happened in the summer of 1977, on a Wednesday night. We were young. We were from Branson. We had gone up to Springfield to cruise Kearny Street. We saw the kids near 60 and 65, close to Greenlawn Cemetery. We saw the gangster later on 65 South, where Saddlebrook is now, in a stretch that was empty and remote back then. There were 4 of us in the car, and we all saw it. And even after all this time, when we talk about that night, we still end up in the same place, asking the same question. What the hell did we see? He does not know how he got here. That is the thought that keeps circling in his head, quiet at first, then louder, then almost funny in the worst possible way. He does not know how he got here, even though some part of him knows that is not true. He has been halfway to this point so many times before. He has driven these same roads with his hands locked around the steering wheel until his knuckles ached. He has sat at empty intersections in the dead hours of the morning, staring at red lights with no other cars around. wondering if the universe was giving him one last chance to stop. He has turned the car around more times than he can count. Always before he crossed the line he knew he could never uncross. He has pulled into parking lots at 3 in the morning and sobbed so hard his ribs hurt, his forehead pressed to the steering wheel, the world outside silent except for the dull hum of the lights over the asphalt. Most nights, it was the Aldi parking lot. He does not know why that became the place. Maybe because it was always empty at that hour. Maybe because the lights were bright enough to make him feel watched, but not bright enough to make him feel seen. Maybe because there was something humiliatingly ordinary about breaking down in front of a discount grocery store while the rest of the world slept. Whatever the reason, he had ended up there again and again. The engine ticking softly after he shut it off, his breath fogging the windshield, his mind dragging him back to the same images he could not escape. He would sit there shaking, crying, cursing, begging himself to go home, telling himself that if he turned around just one more time, maybe the urge would pass. Sometimes it did. Sometimes he drove home before dawn and crawled into bed without sleeping, alone again with the thoughts that had been waiting for him. Therapy did not fix it. He had tried, or at least he had shown up enough times for people to say he tried. He had sat in clean rooms with soft chairs and boxes of tissues placed within easy reach. He had watched professionals nod with practiced sympathy while he searched for words that never seemed ugly enough or true enough. They gave him breathing exercises, grounding techniques, names for feelings, names for trauma, names for grief, names for the terrible storms that came over him without warning. He learned the words, but the words did not remove the pictures. No amount of therapy could undo the images that flashed behind his eyelids whenever he closed them. No careful phrase could reach into his skull and scrape them out. No calm voice could make the memories less bright, less sharp, less alive. Booze did not fix it either. Neither did distraction. He had tried drowning himself without dying, night after night, pouring enough into his body to blur the edges of the world. It worked for minutes, sometimes hours, but never all the way. The pain always found a way through. It waited under the noise. It waited behind the television, behind cheap laughter, behind stale smoke, behind the burning in his throat. It waited inside silence and inside music. It waited in the shower. It waited in the mirror. It waited every time he thought he might have finally worn himself numb. Then it would rise again, that endless ringing of pure hatred, that soundless sound coming from the chasm in his chest where love had once been poured out. That was the worst part. The emptiness was not just empty. It had weight. His gut felt like a black hole, heavy and bottomless, as if his soul had collapsed in on itself and was pulling the rest of him inward piece by piece. Some days he felt hollow. Other days he felt packed full of rot. The feeling of his own body chewing itself up from the inside never stopped. It was relentless and sickening. A slow internal gnawing that made him want to claw at his own skin just to find the thing inside him and rip it out. He could eat and still feel starved. He could sleep for 12 hours and wake up exhausted. He could laugh at something by accident and then hate himself for the sound of it. His body kept living, and that felt like betrayal. It was 2 years ago today. 2 whole years, or maybe 2 roach years, as the broken little part of him, still able to twist language into something bitter and strange, might have called it. He had not even realized the date until now. That almost made him laugh. Not really laugh, but let out a breath that might have become laughter in someone else's throat. He had carried the day in his bones for so long, and still the date had managed to sneak up on him. He had not marked it on a calendar. He had not planned some ritual. He had not woken that morning and said, "Today is the day." But here he was, Of course, here he was. There was no mistaking it. His body had known before his mind did. His grief had been walking him here for 2 years, one step at a time, through every sleepless night, every empty bottle, every parking lot confession, every almost turning back. This was always how it was going to end. He stands there in the dark, with his breath becoming increasingly unsteady, and he knows he has to move before he loses his nerve or gets discovered. The night around him feels too still, the air too thin. Every small sound seems huge, the faint shift of fabric, the pulse in his ears, the tremble in his own breathing, the quiet shape of the room ahead. He tells himself it is too late to turn back now, but the words do not feel like a choice. They feel like a sentence that was handed down long ago. Too late to turn back. Too late to become someone else. Too late to forgive. Too late to heal. Too late for anything clean or human. Too late for Anna. He does not mean to say it out loud. The words leave him before he can stop them, barely more than a whisper, but in the silence they strike him like a slap. Her name. Anna, he had not spoken it in so long. Not really, not with his mouth. He had thought it, dreamed it, choked on it, seen it written in places where it was not written, but he had not allowed it to become sound. Hearing it now startles him so badly that for a moment the room seems to tilt. His own voice sounds unfamiliar, rough and small and ruined, like it belongs to someone crouched at the bottom of a well. Anna, there was a time when saying her name could change the temperature of the world. There was a time when that name carried warmth, stupid jokes, bad food, lazy afternoons, and all the soft, ridiculous little details that make love feel bigger than it has any right to be. There had been a person who could say her name and summon the warmth of 1,000 unattended hot pockets, glowing and half forgotten, somehow still comforting in their cheap, messy way. He had been that person once, or something close to him. He remembers it like a story someone else told him, a version of himself who could smile without forcing it, a version who could wait for a text and feel excitement instead of dread, a version who believed there would be more time. He does not recognize that person now. How could he? The only witness to that version of him is gone. Anna is gone, and with her went the proof that he had ever been anything other than this ruined thing standing in the dark. Without her, the old self feels like a rumor, a name attached to a face he no longer wears. She had known him before the collapse. She had seen him stupid, gentle, warm, human. Now no one can verify that man existed. He can barely verify it himself. Her name hangs in the air, and with it comes the wound, fresh again, as if 2 years have done nothing but keep it open. The memory of her does not arrive gently. It tears through him. He sees the garbage bin. He sees her body crumpled where no living thing should have been left. He sees the end of everything he loved, reduced to something hidden, discarded, made small by someone else's evil. The last bit of roachmanity in him, that tiny surviving piece that still flinched at what he was becoming, sinks to the bottom of that memory and stays there with her. Something inside him goes quiet. Something else wakes up. His only purpose now is revenge. The rage fills him so completely that for the first time in years, he does not feel empty. That is the terrible mercy of it. Grief had hollowed him out, scooped him clean, left him walking around like a vessel with nothing inside but echoes. But rage is different. Rage has heat. Rage has direction. Rage does not ask him to make sense of pain, or live with uncertainty, or forgive the impossible. Rage says there is still one thing left to do. It enters him like fire poured into a broken engine. His limbs stop feeling weak. His hands stop trembling. His breath steadies, not because he is calm, but because something older and harsher than calm has taken hold. He feels suddenly full and burning. The room sharpens around him. Edges become clean. Shadows become places to pass through. His body, so long a prison of sickness and memory, becomes an instrument. Not healthy, not healed, not saved, but useful. That is enough for him now. A new life courses through him, not the gentle life he lost when Anna was taken, but a violent, blazing second life, made from everything that could not die in him. He feels possessed, though not by something outside himself. He is possessed by love turned rotten, by grief sharpened into a blade, by 2 years of midnight drives and parking lot sobbing and prayers that came back unanswered. He looks toward the bed, toward the shape of the man on the pillow, and the world narrows to that single point. He does not see a man anymore. That would be too generous. A man has a past, a mother, a laugh, a favorite song, a way he takes his coffee. A man can be pitied. A man can be reasoned with. What lies there is not a man to him. It is the thing that broke the world. It is the destroyer of love. It is the shape that stands between the life he had and the life he has been forced to drag behind him like a corpse. His eyes burn. His gaze cuts through the dark. In his mind, the body on the pillow is not flesh, but symbol. Not a person, but the whole awful moment made visible. He sees a single gut-splattered flip-flop. He sees all the wrongness of that day reduced to one obscene image. He sees the proof that Anna had been turned from a living person into an aftermath. He sees every night he almost came here. Every time he stopped himself. Every time he told himself he was not this. Every time he drove away and cried until sunrise. Every time he tried to be human. The reaction is instant and explosive. There is no more halfway. No more Aldi parking lot. No more turning the car around at 3 a.m. No more swallowing the name. No more pretending the hole inside him will someday close. The words tear out of him before the rest of him moves, wild and burning and larger than his ruined body should be able to hold. You are the destroyer of love, he screams into the dark, but I am the destroyer of evil. And then he flies toward Op. For one suspended second, everything seems to stop around him. The room, the bed, the shadows, the breath in his lungs, the old life behind him. The new life burning through him, all of it hangs in the air like the final frame of a film before it melts. He is not thinking anymore, not in words. Thought is too slow for what he has become. There is only momentum. There is only Anna's name echoing inside him. There is only the terrible belief that if he can destroy the thing in front of him, some impossible balance might be restored, even though a deeper part of him knows it will not bring her back. That deeper part is small now, buried under the fire, but it is not entirely gone. It whispers that revenge is not resurrection. It whispers that blood cannot rebuild a body left in a garbage bin. It whispers that once he crosses this line, the man who used to say Anna's name with warmth will be gone forever. Not just hidden or wounded, but finally dead. He hears none of it clearly. Or maybe he hears it and hates it. The rage is too loud. The chasm in his heart has found a voice, and it is screaming louder than grief ever did. So he moves. And in that movement is every night he survived when he did not want to. Every time he turned away from this ending. Every session where he sat under soft lights and tried to make words out of horror. Every drink that failed. Every distraction that collapsed. Every dream that showed him Anna as she was, then as she ended. Every morning he woke up disappointed to still be alive. Every mile of road between him and the point of no return. Every second of the 2 years that brought him here without him admitting it. He does not know how he got here. But he does. The road was grief. The vehicle was rage. The map was her name. And now, at the end of it, he is no longer sitting in a parking lot with his head against the steering wheel, begging himself to go home. He is no longer halfway. He is no longer stopping before he goes too far. He is here. When I was in my early 20s, I started dating the man who is now my husband, and during that time I used to go over to his place all the time. It became one of those houses that was part of our beginning together, the kind of place you remember not just because of what happened there, but because of the stage of life you were in when you were there. We were young, still getting to know each other in that deep way people do when a relationship is becoming serious, and his house was where we spent a lot of quiet time together. It was in Miami, and it was a very cool house, but also a very old one. It had a strange look to it, almost like it was made out of coral, or at least that is how it always looked to me. It did not have the clean, simple layout of a newer home. It had character, but it also had a kind of oddness to it that you could feel as soon as you spent enough time inside. The house had all these little nooks and crannies, strange corners, tight spaces, old closets, and areas that seemed like they had been added or changed over time. It felt like the kind of house that had been lived in by many people before us, and not all of its history was visible. There were spots that made you wonder why they were built that way, or what they had been used for. During the day, that made the house interesting. It gave it personality. But at night, those same strange little spaces felt different. Shadows sat in the corners. Doors did not always feel like they led only to normal rooms. Closets seemed deeper than they should have been. The house had that old home feeling where every creak could be explained, but not every creak felt explainable. My husband had a little sister who was about 7 years old at the time, and she absolutely loved hanging out with us when I was there. She was young enough to want attention, and old enough to have her own little personality. She was funny, playful, and the kind of kid who wanted to be included in whatever the older people were doing. His parents were divorced, and she would go to her dad's house every other weekend. On the day this happened, she was going to be picked up later in the evening, but she was home for most of the day. So we spent time with her. It was normal and lighthearted. Nothing about the day felt scary. We were just hanging out, playing with her, letting her be part of our day the way she always liked to be. One of the last games we played with her before she left was hide and seek. That was exactly the kind of game that made sense in that house, because there were so many weird little places to hide. It was not a big, open, modern house where every room was easy to understand. It had odd spaces, tight corners, closets, and little hidden areas that made a child's imagination light up. She was excited, and we played along. At some point, during one of the rounds, we could not find her right away. We looked around the usual places, checked rooms, checked spots where a little kid might squeeze in, and then we finally found her in this tiny, unused crawl space inside my boyfriend's closet. That crawl space was strange on its own. It was not a place anyone really used. It was tucked inside the closet, small and easy to overlook, the kind of hidden space an old house keeps like a secret. I do not remember it being useful for anything. It was just there, a little door or opening inside the closet that led into this cramped, unused space. She had hidden in there, and the only reason we found her was because she laughed. She could not hold it in. We heard that little giggle, followed the sound, and opened the space to find her tucked inside, proud of herself for choosing such a good hiding spot. That detail matters because her laugh was not ordinary. She had, and still has, a very distinct giggle. It is one of those laughs that belongs only to one person. Some people have laughs you can recognize from another room or across a crowded place, and hers was like that even as a kid. It was unique, bright, and unmistakably hers. To this day, people still comment on it because it has always been so specific to her. You could hear that giggle once and know exactly who it belonged to. So when we found her hiding in the crawl space because of that laugh, it was not just a child laughed, it was her laugh. Her exact little giggle, coming from that exact hidden spot inside the closet. Later that evening, she left to go to her dad's house. The day moved on like any normal day would. There was nothing strange about the goodbye. She was picked up, she was gone, and hours passed. The house became quiet in that way houses do after a child leaves. When a kid has been running around, laughing, playing, and filling the space with energy, their absence has a sound of its own. Suddenly the rooms feel larger and stiller. The air feels more settled. The little noises that were covered by laughter and footsteps become easier to hear. It was late by then. My boyfriend and I were in his room, lying on his bed, talking and hanging out. No one else was home. That part is important too. There was no one in the house who could have been making noises. His sister had been gone for hours. His parents were not there. It was just the two of us, in his room, in that old Miami house, with all its odd spaces and hidden corners. We were relaxed, not scared, not talking about anything creepy, and not trying to scare each other. It was just a normal, late-night moment between two people who were comfortable together. Then we heard a noise from inside his closet. It was not loud, but it was clear enough that we both noticed it. It sounded like a small door creaking open, not the main closet door, because that door was closed. The sound came from deeper inside the closet, from the area where that little crawl space was. At first, we did not panic. We were confused more than anything. Old houses make noises. Wood shifts, hinges creak, things settle. But this did not sound like a random house noise. It sounded like a door opening, and the only door inside that closed closet that made sense was the little crawl space door where his sister had hidden earlier that day. We both looked at each other at the same time. It was one of those moments where you do not even need to say anything, because the look says it for you. Did you hear that? Was that inside the closet? Was that the crawl space? Why would that move? We were confused, but not fully scared yet. There is always a second or two where your brain tries to be reasonable. Maybe something shifted. Maybe the little door had not been latched right. Maybe air pressure moved it. Maybe the house was just old. You try to explain it before fear takes over. And then, while we were looking right at each other, we both heard it. His sister's giggle, clear as day. It came from inside the closet, from the same area where she had been hiding just a few hours earlier. It was not a vague sound that kind of resembled a laugh. It was not a squeak from the house or a noise we later turned into a laugh in our memories. It was her giggle, her exact, unmistakable, one-of-a-kind giggle, the same little laugh that had given away her hiding place earlier. It came from that crawl space, as if she were still inside it, trying not to laugh while we searched for her. But she was not there. She had been gone for hours. That is the part that froze us. We both heard the same thing at the same time. We both knew exactly what it was. We both knew where it came from. And we both knew there was no possible normal reason for it. His sister was at her dad's house. No one else was home. The closet door was closed. The crawl space was inside the closet. There was no child hiding in there. There was no one who could have made that sound. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. We just sat there, frozen on the bed, eyes wide, staring at each other. I remember that silence after the giggle almost more than the giggle itself. It was like the room had gone still around us. My body knew something was wrong before I could even think through it. Every normal explanation disappeared at once. The laugh had been too specific, too clear, too perfectly hers. It was not just a spooky noise in an old house. It was a voice, a personality, a sound attached to someone we loved, coming from a place where she had been earlier, but could not possibly be now. That is what made it terrifying. If the closet had creaked, we could have ignored it. If something had fallen, we could have checked and moved on. If we had heard some random whisper or strange noise, maybe we could have convinced ourselves it was the house. But hearing her exact giggle from that exact hiding spot was different. It felt intentional. It felt like something had listened earlier that day, learned the sound, and played it back to us when she was gone. That idea made my skin crawl then, and it still does now. I finally found the courage to move. I do not know what snapped me out of it, but suddenly I unfroze, and my body chose for me. I ran off the bed and straight out of his room. I did not stop to check the closet. I did not open the door. I did not want to know what was inside. Every instinct in me said to get out of that room, away from that closet, away from whatever had just used his sister's laugh in the dark. My boyfriend followed right behind me, and that told me everything I needed to know. He had heard it too. He was just as scared as I was. This was not me overreacting or imagining something. We both knew something had happened. We refused to stay there that night. There was no debate, no attempt to be brave, no let's just check it out. We were done. The house did not feel like a cool old Miami house anymore. It felt like it had shown us something it had been hiding. The crawl space inside his closet, which had been a fun hiding spot for a child earlier that day, suddenly felt like the wrongest place in the world. The idea of going back into that room, lying on that bed, and trying to sleep with that closet nearby was impossible. There are some fears you can talk yourself down from, and there are others where your body simply says no. To this day, I believe something mimicked her exact giggle from earlier that day. I do not know what it was. I do not know if it was something attached to the house, something that lived in that little crawl space, something that used familiar sounds, or something stranger than I can explain. I only know that it sounded like her, and it came from a place where she had been hiding earlier. That connection is what made it so frightening. It was not random. It felt like a repeat, like something had watched the game, heard her laugh, and then used it to get our attention after she was gone. That house had a few other strange occurrences over time, but that one takes the cake for me. Other things can be brushed off. A noise in an old house can be explained. A strange feeling in a hallway can be nerves. A door moving can be air pressure. But a voice or a laugh that belongs to a specific person who is not there is much harder to dismiss, especially when two people hear it at the same time, especially when the person has a laugh so unique that there is no mistaking it, especially when it comes from the exact place where she had hidden only hours earlier. I think about the timing a lot. Why that night? Why after hide and seek? Why after she left? Why from the crawl space? Part of me wonders if that little space had always felt strange and we just did not notice until something used it. Maybe the house had old energy in it. Maybe that hidden spot inside the closet had been quiet for years until a child crawled inside laughing, and something there learned how to answer. That sounds dramatic, but that is what it felt like, as if the house had repeated her in the most unsettling way possible. There is also something especially disturbing about mimicry. A strange sound can scare you, but a familiar sound coming from the wrong place is worse. It makes your brain split in two. One part recognizes the sound and wants to respond normally. That is his sister's laugh. That is someone we know. That is a child we were just playing with. But the other part knows the truth. She is not here. She cannot be in the closet. That sound should not exist right now. The fear comes from those two truths colliding. Familiarity becomes the thing that makes it horrifying. If it had sounded like an unknown child, that would have been scary too, but it might have felt like a ghost story. Because it sounded like her, it felt more personal. It felt like something was reaching into our day and pulling out a piece of it to use against us. It took a happy moment, a child laughing during hide and seek, and twisted it into something terrifying. That is why it has stayed with me for 14 years. It was not just a noise, it was the wrong echo of a real moment. My husband and I have been together for 14 years now, and we still remember that night clearly. We still talk about it sometimes, and neither of us has ever changed the basic story. We were lying in bed. No one else was home. His sister had been gone for hours. We heard the crawlspace door or something inside the closet creak. We looked at each other. Then we heard her exact giggle from inside the closet. We froze. Then we ran. That is it. Simple, clear, and impossible. Even now, when I think about it, the hair on my arms stands up. I can still picture the room. I can still feel the moment we looked at each other in confusion. I can still hear that laugh in my memory, bright and familiar and completely out of place. I can still feel the sudden cold fear of realizing that whatever had made that sound was not his sister, but wanted us to think of her. That old house in Miami had many strange little spaces, but after that night, the crawl space inside his closet never felt like just another odd feature of an old home. It felt like a mouth that had opened once and laughed back at us with someone else's voice. And that is why, out of everything that happened in that house, that moment still scares me the most. This exact kind of thing happened to me in high school more than 20 years ago, and even now I still think about it because of how perfectly it lined up. It sounds silly when I tell it at first, because it was just a football game, not some life or death event or some huge supernatural vision. But when something happens exactly the way you dreamed it, and then it happens in front of a whole group of people who heard you say it before it happened, it stops feeling silly. It becomes one of those strange moments you carry around for the rest of your life, not because it changed everything, but because it made reality feel just a little less solid than it had before. Back then, I was in high school, and football was a big part of my life. Our team had made it all the way to the state championship, which was a huge deal for us. When you are a teenager playing high school football, a state championship feels like the biggest stage in the world. The whole school talks about it. Teachers bring it up. Students who barely watched regular games suddenly care. Parents, coaches, friends, and people from town all start treating the team like something special. The pressure builds day by day until the game feels larger than life. For us, it was not just another Friday night under the lights. It was the game everyone would remember. Before the game, the energy was insane. You could feel it in the locker room, in the way people moved, in the noise, in the nervous jokes, in the way guys were trying to act confident, even if they were scared inside. Everyone handles that kind of pressure differently. Some people get quiet. Some pace around. Some slap shoulder pads and yell. Some sit with their headphones on and try to block everything out. Pre-game has its own strange atmosphere because you are waiting for something you cannot stop anymore. All the practices are done. All the speeches have been given. You know the other team is out there. You know the crowd is waiting. You know in a few minutes the whole thing will begin, and after that, there will be no more imagining it. You will have to live it. One of my teammates was trying to hype us up before the game. He was doing what teammates do, talking loud, trying to get everybody fired up, trying to turn nervous energy into aggression. It was normal football stuff. He wanted us ready. He wanted us believing we could win. And in that moment, I told him something that probably sounded like nothing more than confidence or pre-game adrenaline. I told him I had had a dream, but it was not just any dream. It was vivid. It was one of those dreams that feels too real, the kind where you wake up and for a few seconds you are not fully sure if it already happened or not. In the dream, I intercepted the ball and ran it back for a touchdown. It was clear in my mind. I could remember the feeling of it, the movement, the sudden shift from defense to offense, the open field, the rush of realizing I had the ball and could score. It was not vague like most dreams are. It did not feel like random nonsense from my sleeping brain. It felt like a preview. So I said it. I told him basically that I had dreamed I was going to intercept the ball and take it for a touchdown. At the time, I do not think I was trying to make a prophecy. I was probably half joking, half serious, caught up in the emotion of the moment. It was the kind of thing you say before a big game, because you want to believe it. Football players say all kinds of things before kickoff. They say they are going to dominate, make big plays, shut somebody down, score, hit hard, change the game. Most of it is just part of the atmosphere. But this felt different to me because the dream had been so clear. The game finally started, and the other team received the ball first. That alone made the moment line up. They were going to have the first offensive play, which meant I had a chance to be on the field right away, and maybe, just maybe, the dream could become real. But even then, I do not think I fully believed it was about to happen. How could I? A football game has too many moving parts. The other team has a play call. The quarterback has a read. The receiver runs a route. The defense moves. One person slips. One person blocks differently. One throw goes a foot higher or lower, and the whole play becomes something else. For a dream to match real life, everything has to line up in a way that seems impossible. Then, the ball was snapped. It was the first play of the game. The whole stadium was still settling into the idea that the championship had begun. The crowd noise was there, but the game had not found its rhythm yet. Players were still moving on that first burst of adrenaline. The offense ran their play, the quarterback dropped back, and the pass came. I saw it, reacted, and suddenly the ball was mine. I intercepted it. That alone would have been huge. An interception on the first play of a state championship game is already the kind of thing a player dreams about. It changes momentum immediately. It tells your sideline that you are ready. It shakes the other team before they even get started. But the dream had not been only about intercepting the ball. In the dream, I had taken it back for a touchdown. And in real life, as soon as I caught it, I had room to run. Everything after that happened fast, but also strangely clear, the way big plays sometimes do in your memory. I started running. The field opened. My teammates started blocking and yelling. The other team had to suddenly switch from offense to chase mode. You can feel that shift when you have the ball after a turnover. 1 second, everyone is running their assigned routes and responsibilities, and the next second, the whole field is chaos. Your body takes over. You are not thinking in full sentences. You are just moving, cutting, accelerating, trying not to get caught, feeling the noise rise around you. I took it all the way back for a touchdown. 19 seconds into the game. That number still sticks with me because it makes the whole thing even more unbelievable. 19 seconds. The first play. The exact thing I had just told my teammate about before the game. I had said I dreamed I would intercept the ball and score, and then almost immediately, in the biggest game of our season, that is exactly what happened. Not later in the second quarter, not after several drives, not in some vague way that could be twisted to fit the dream. First play, interception, touchdown. 19 seconds in. When I got back to the sideline, people were losing their minds. Part of it was the play itself, of course. A defensive touchdown to start a state championship game is enough to make any sideline explode. Guys were yelling, jumping, hitting my helmet, grabbing me, laughing, shouting, doing everything football players do when adrenaline takes over. But there was another layer to it, because I had literally told them I was going to do it. That was the part that made everyone react differently. It was not just, "Great play." It was, "You said this was going to happen." They had heard me say it before kickoff. They knew I had talked about the dream. And then it happened exactly. That is the kind of moment where even the most logical people pause for a second. On one hand, football players dream about making big plays all the time. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe I was already locked in because of the dream, and that made me react faster. Maybe saying it out loud put it in my head so clearly that when the opportunity came, I was ready in a way I might not have been otherwise. There are reasonable explanations you can try to build around it, but none of them fully remove the weirdness of how exact it was. The fact that other people heard me say it before it happened is what makes it impossible for me to brush off. If I had kept the dream to myself, the story would feel different. I could tell people afterward, "I dreamed this," and they might think I was exaggerating or remembering it differently after the fact. That happens. People reshape memories without meaning to. But I said it before the game. My teammate heard it. Others knew. Then the game began, and the first play turned into the exact thing from the dream. There were witnesses not only to the play, but to the prediction. That sideline reaction is burned into my memory. Everyone already had the wild energy of a championship game, and then this strange little impossible thing happened right away. It felt like the whole team got an extra charge from it. Not only had we scored, but it felt like something had lined up for us. It felt like the universe had given us a sign, or at least that is how it felt in the moment. When you are young and full of adrenaline, a moment like that can feel almost magical. You start thinking, maybe you are meant to win. Maybe the night belongs to you. Maybe there is something bigger happening than just a football game. I do not want to overstate it. It was still football. It was still a high school game. There are bigger and stranger things in the world than a dream about an interception coming true. But when you are the person it happens to, and when it happens in such a clean, direct way, it feels personal. It feels like you briefly touched something you cannot explain. Most dreams fade by breakfast. This one walked onto the field with me and became real 19 seconds after kickoff. What still gets me is how specific it was. If I had dreamed we would win, that would be easy to dismiss. If I had dreamed I would have a good game, that would be too broad to matter. If I had dreamed I would make a big play, plenty of things could fit. But I dreamed about intercepting the ball and running it back for a touchdown. That is a very specific football moment. Then the other team received the ball first, threw it on the first play, I picked it off, and I scored. It was not just close, it was the thing. For years afterward, that memory stayed with me as one of those stories I could tell and still not fully understand. People sometimes have premonition dreams, or at least dreams that feel like premonitions after something similar happens. A lot of the time, you can explain them away as coincidence or selective memory. But this one had the rare feature of being spoken out loud before it happened. That changes the feeling of it. It makes it less like a private coincidence and more like something reality had to answer for in front of witnesses. I sometimes wonder if the dream changed how I played. Maybe because I had seen it so vividly in my head, I was more prepared for that exact situation. Maybe my body recognized the play faster because my mind had rehearsed the feeling of intercepting and running. Athletes visualize things all the time, and sometimes visualization helps performance. Maybe the dream was just a strange, accidental version of that. Maybe I had studied the other team enough that some part of my brain anticipated the play before I consciously knew it. Maybe my subconscious put together tendencies, formations, routes, and possibilities, then turned it into a dream. That explanation is possible, and honestly, it is probably the most practical one. But even if that is true, it still feels eerie, because from my point of view, I did not consciously plan it. I did not know the first play. I did not know they would throw that pass. I did not know I would be in position. I did not know the field would open up. I only knew that I had dreamed it, and then it happened. Whether that was prophecy, coincidence, instinct, or subconscious pattern recognition, it felt unreal in the moment. There is a special kind of shock that comes when a dream becomes reality too quickly. Usually, life gives you time to forget a dream before anything even slightly similar happens. But this was immediate. Pre-game, I tell my teammate. Kickoff, first play. Interception, touchdown, sideline chaos. There was almost no time for the dream to become vague. It was still fresh. Everyone who heard it still remembered. That made the whole thing hit harder. It was like the moment had been waiting just outside the locker room. The older I get, the more I appreciate how rare a moment like that is. Not just the play, though the play itself was obviously one of the coolest moments of my life. But the combination of dream, prediction, timing, and execution is what makes it stick. Lots of players score touchdowns. Lots of players get interceptions. Lots of people have vivid dreams. But having a vivid dream about a specific play, telling your teammate before the game, and then doing it on the first play of a state championship is the kind of alignment that does not happen often. It also made the memory feel communal. It was not just mine. My teammates were part of it because they heard me say it. They reacted not just as football players celebrating a touchdown, but as people who had just watched something weird come true. That shared reaction gave the moment weight. If no one else had known, it would have lived mostly inside my head. Instead, it became one of those team stories, the kind people repeat with disbelief. He told us he was going to do it, and then he did it 19 seconds in. That kind of thing can become larger than the event itself over time. Memories from high school sports already grow in a certain way because they belong to a period of life that feels intense and distant at the same time. You remember the lights brighter than they probably were. You remember the crowd louder. You remember the cold air, the smell of grass, the tape on your wrists, the way your pads felt, the sound of cleats on the ground. Add something strange like a dream coming true, and the memory takes on an almost mythic quality. It becomes more than a play. It becomes a story about the night reality winked at you. I do not know what to call it. Premonition sounds too dramatic, but coincidence feels too weak. Maybe it was just one of those moments where your mind sees something before you do. Maybe some part of me knew I was ready, knew the opponent's tendencies, knew the kind of play that might come, and turned that into a dream. Maybe I was just lucky. Maybe the dream had nothing to do with the play, and the universe simply lined up in a way that made it look meaningful. I can accept any of those explanations on a normal day, but when I replay the timing in my head, it still gives me chills. Because I did not say, I hope I make a big play. I told them about the dream. I told them I intercepted the ball and ran it in for a touchdown. Then the other team got the ball first, snapped it, threw the pass, and 19 seconds later, I was in the end zone. When I came back to the sideline, everyone knew. That is the part that keeps the story alive for me. The look on their faces, the shouting, the disbelief. The feeling that for one moment all of us were thinking the same thing, that should not have happened exactly like that. It was silly in the sense that it was just a game. But it was not silly in the way it felt. At 16 or 17, standing on that sideline after scoring in a state championship game, exactly the way I had dreamed, it felt like the world had cracked open for a second and let me see behind the curtain. Maybe there was nothing behind it. Maybe it was only chance. But for that moment, it felt like I had been handed a scene from the future, spoken it out loud, and then walked straight into it. More than 20 years later, I still remember it clearly. The dream, the pre-game conversation, the first snap, the ball in my hands, the run, the touchdown, the sideline exploding because I had told them it was going to happen. Some memories fade because they are ordinary. This one never did. It stayed sharp because it was too perfect, too strange, and too public to dismiss. It was one of those rare moments where life accidentally writes a scene so cleanly that if it happened in a movie, people would say it was too unbelievable. But it happened. 19 seconds into the game, just like the dream. The stories may be over, but some nights do not end when the video does. The people you heard tonight were not looking for fear. They were living normal lives until one moment changed the way they saw the world around them. Tell me in the comments which story stayed with you the longest. Subscribe to Nockmeyer Witness for more true accounts from people who saw something they wish they could forget. Good night, and if you wake up suddenly, do not assume it was just a dream.